That's fine.
Okay, y'all are live.
Next time, make sure it's there. All right. He's not gonna be here. He says it's not happening.
Oh, okay.
Sorry, I'm gonna relay that to you.
Have you heard from Frank? Is he coming today or? Okay. Okay, well, it's 6 o'clock, so we'll go ahead and get started. This is the charter review workshop. It's March 22nd. Lori, did we take roll at workshops?
Yes, we did.
Thank you.
Mayor Young,
Here.
Vice Mayor Stone, Councilmember Deambra, Councilmember Brandon,
Here.
Councilmember Johnson,
Here.
and also in attendance, we have the Charter Review Board members, Chair Abby Brennan, Vice Chair Kimberly Kraft, Member Gary Vaughn, Member Marcia Nielsen, and Member David Henson.
Okay, so I'd like to start off and suggest a number of the items on here are kind of just housekeeping edits. For example, Article 1, Section 203, oath of office. If anyone had any questions on the housekeeping, I'd be happy to go through them. Otherwise, if there was no questions on the housekeeping items, I'd like to read those off the record and we can just move on and focus on the items that are the actual changes to the charter.
So every section that starts with recommend housekeeping edits?
Yeah, so
Okay.
I can go through and read them. It's Article 1, Section 203, Section 206, Section 208, Section 213, Article 3, Section 302, Section 304, Article 5, Section 501, Section 502, Article 6, Section 601, Section 603, Section 604, Section 605, Section 607, Section 608, Section 611, Article 7, Section 701, Section 702, Section 703, Section 704, and that is it.
I'm fine with that.
Yeah. That's fine.
Okay, so then we'll move back to Section 201, selections, term, and compensation. So I'll open the floor to you guys first, if you have any questions or comments on those.
Hang on, I'm gonna find it.
Are you looking my way?
Nope, I was,
I can't tell. Just
Because-
sure.
and you guys don't have anything to present today because you presented at the
We did.
last council meeting, so, okay, thank you.
I can't find the specific. The one thing I really wanted to just go through some details was in the event that a council member is not filling a seat, whether they left for funeral or a death of a council member or they have to resign, so to speak, I'd like to discuss the details of whether current council would appoint somebody or if the village would look at holding a special election or leaving the seat empty, depending on the time frame.
Was that something that's?
I remember I asked Mrs. Brennan about that last time at the meeting, because I just wanted to make sure the details are very clear on.
So I believe you're referencing Section 205?
Yeah.
So maybe, should we start at 201 and we'll get to 20? Do we want to stay in order?
Sure, we can go in order.
I don't mind saying in order, I just didn't know if you
Okay,
were talking
yeah,
about.
if you guys want to have any comments on Section 201 first.
Yeah, obviously the big change would be the term, 2 to 3 years, and then term limits. I don't really see, I guess maybe you would want consistency, right? But until a couple of years ago, it was very consistent for a long time. We've just had, this seat, in fact, a couple of changes. But having said that, I don't see a problem going to 3 years. I understand the thought process there. I don't think it should be 2 years and only 2 years. I don't know that we need 3 years, but I'm not against it. Term limits, I like, in everything. But if we did go to 6 years, or I'm sorry, 3 years, I think 2 terms would be enough. And if you want to do it again, wait your turn and run again. I like that idea. As much as we want consistency, turnover's a good thing too every now and then. I think 6 years is a good length, but what else do we have in one? Runoff elections.
Yeah, I can get behind the 3-year terms instead of the 2 years. Only because, like many of us have learned, by the time when you first come in, getting through the established budget, setting goals with the team that's at hand, sometimes hitting those goals takes 3 years. Plus that is pretty consistent across the board in other municipalities as well. Term limits I'm not against. Obviously, the people will get to choose whether they want term limits or not. I would be open. I kind of tinker between the 2 terms and 3 terms, so it'd be 6 years and 9 years. Only for the fact that our village is so small, and it really is just a delicate matter. You either get a really great representative, but again, every 3 years, someone can stand up and run.
Right, that's exactly right. Just because, if we move it to 3 and we did set the term limit to 3 consecutive terms,
Right.
doesn't mean you get an automatic 9 years, obviously.
Right.
Like if they don't think I'm doing a good job,
Right.
replace me,
That's kind of
And then
what
we don't
I'm
gotta
saying.
worry about the term limits.
Right, and just to clarify one more time, Mrs. Brennan, if someone finishes their term limit, if there was a limit in place, they would have to sit out 1 full term before rerunning again.
Correct.
Okay.
And Mayor, I want to put this out there and just remind you, it may or may not alter your thought process on how this goes forward. But remember, you're not deciding whether or not to, you're deciding what, if anything, will go on the ballot
Right.
for the voters. So subtle difference in process, but just keep that in mind. Really the ultimate question will be what, if anything, you want to put on the ballot for the voters to make a decision on.
Understood, thank you.
So we need to put on the ballot a specific for term limits with a choice of 2 terms or 3 terms, or just term limits with a 1 choice?
If the council is going to entertain establishing a term limit, you would need to decide what that's going to be.
Okay.
What's before you tonight are the committee's recommendations based on their very hard work. You're not obligated to accept them or to accept them in the form that's been presented to you. You're certainly entitled to either say no or say, I like the idea, but I want to tweak it. And so, you could say 3 term limits or 4 term limits. That number was what the committee thought was appropriate based on their deliberations, and I'll certainly let committee members, I don't want to speak for them, but there was a lot of discussion that the term limit piece was discussed in conjunction with changing the term from 2 to 3 years. So if you had a 3-year term and 2 term limits, that gets you 6 years.
Right, so it would go on the ballot as, do you want to implement this, yes or no? It's not going to be, would you like 3 years, 6 years?
Right, there's no
So
option.
we
Right,
decide. Yeah.
you would decide what to put on the ballot. So you
Okay.
could say, we're gonna leave it at 2 years, but we're gonna impose a 2-term term limit, or we're gonna change it to 3 years, but we're gonna allow a 3-term term limit. So, but whatever you decide, that will go on the ballot. That's what will go on the ballot.
Okay.
And Keith will have some sample ballot language that you guys will ultimately approve, which would be the next step. So you guys are going to be giving him direction to what you guys want to move forward with. He'll bring you guys back the official language for you guys to vote on to be on the ballot. That's correct, right, Mr. Davis?
Correct.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, and at the back of the agenda, there's kind of a sample of what it will look like, so get an idea of how it's laid out.
All right, so I would lean towards asking the people for 3-year terms and ask them for three terms, three-year terms. That makes sense. Because at every 3 years, like Mr. Johnson just said, there's a checkpoint of somebody being able to run against that incumbent.
Okay, any comments on the runoff? Doing a drawing lot? So I had a question that might help, and first of all, the term limits and, the years, I think 3 years is really good as well, because kind of at the end of year 2, you're just hitting your stride, you've gone through a whole budget cycle, so you're really just getting into your groove at the end of year 2, so I think 3 years is appropriate, and I've gone back and forth a lot same with Lori. I think maybe doing 3-year terms would be a little better due to our size, and it might be hard to get qualified people to run if a seat was open. And I guess from the board, did you guys discuss 2 terms versus 3 terms? Any pros and cons with that?
I think part of the discussion had to do with incumbency. And when you are in office, it's a lot harder for somebody to run against you, especially in a very small community where it could be neighbor against neighbor. So by looking at the shorter terms, we were giving more of a chance that somebody new would have the opportunity to be able to run. That might want to sit it out if they think they have to spend a lot of money or it's going to be acrimonious or anything like that. So that was, I think, where we were, so that we could see new people coming into government of the village instead of we looked at 3 as well, came back to 2 and thought, well, if we, obviously it comes to you, you make, you go, what you decide goes on the ballot. But just to bring, that was the reasoning, I think, to be able to turn and see if we could get more people now that the demographics have changed so much and people are moving into the community. It's hard to run against someone who's been in office for a while. So that was the reason.
That sounds good to me. I like that. I like the idea of, hey, your 6 years are up, let's get somebody else in here. I think I like that number.
I know, Jeremy, didn't Kyle give you some feedback? I don't know if you're allowed to report on that, or, 'cause
Well,
it's
he
not
just said
here.
he liked the 3-year terms. He does like term limits. He just did not give me whether it was 2 3-year terms or 3. So he didn't give me either one at this point. So you guys have to debate that, I guess.
Okay.
I'm still a little torn on doing 2 terms or 3 terms.
Yeah, I like the 2. 6 just seems like long enough to get something done, but it's also not too long where you may, like Ms. Brennan said, we may have somebody up here. I'll speak as a resident. There may have been someone up there that I was kind of wishy-washy on, maybe kind of indifferent, but I just didn't want to run against that. You're going against your neighbor, you're going against friends. It's a small community, we all know everybody. Maybe somebody just is being polite and doesn't want to do it. But 6 years, all right, that seat's going to be up in a year or whatever, now's my chance to do it. Better than having to wait 9 years, I think.
I agree with all that, but at the same time, there's a part of me that also people shouldn't be afraid to take on the challenge. I personally had to run against an incumbent that sat here for quite a while, and I took on that challenge and I tried my best, and I didn't think it was going to go in my favor, but the people spoke and I was very honored, and I sit here and that's why I'm still leaning towards the 9 year basically top out. Because when I also look at the history, I think some people might have been in a seat a little too long, and that was kind of hard to some degree because there wasn't anybody stepping up to run, but then sometimes there wasn't someone stepping up to run and someone might feel like they got stuck. So I feel like maybe the 9 might be a happy medium, only because when I think back, when I first came on, we just started talking about the rec center, and the rec center is just now coming to fruit, you know, opening soon, and like, that took a while. Again, I could go either way, but I'm really sitting with the 9, the 3-year terms.
Yeah, I think I'm leaning that direction still as well.
Which
The 3-year terms.
3-year terms?
So how, I mean, we're not voting on anything and
You
it's
need to
going to go
give-
on a ballot, but how do we
you may give-
accomplish what?
And Keith can give you the
Yeah,
direction.
there's no action tonight. If the three of, and you're down 2 council members as well, I don't know what their input's gonna be. You know, I can certainly start, based on what the discussion, and to the extent there's consensus, I can bring back what the ballot question would look like. I don't have to put it into ordinance form yet to do that. That's, the hard part is really crafting the summary and the question that'll go on the ballot. Once the council approves that language, then I can put it into ordinance form, and you'll be able to adopt the ordinance that goes to the supervisor of elections office. You know, we're only in, you have almost a full year still before the election, and I think a good at least 8 months before the final document has to be to the supervisor of elections office. So we're not up against any hard time crunches yet. So I could do that based on the discussions from what I'm hearing at this point on the term and term limits. I could at least draft a ballot question and summary that would provide the voters the opportunity to vote on changing the term from 2 years to 3 years and imposing a 3-term term limit. One of the other, in addition to the substance, there's, and the committee talked about this a bit, there's the question of the form of the ballot. You know, those don't have to be in one question. Those could be separate ballot questions. They can be put together. They sort of go together in terms of what they do, but they don't have to be together. You can have as many ballot questions as you want. You could have one ballot question that says we want to amend the charter, see the ordinance, or you could have 30 ballot questions that drill down and put a separate question for each and every change. Now, you know, obviously you get to one end of that extreme, it's extremely vague and it's very difficult to tell the voters what they're voting on. At the other extreme, you end up with real voter fatigue, and people get, you know, that after 4, maybe 5 questions, people just start getting tired. They don't want to vote anymore. It's just a reality, especially if there are other things on the ballot as well. You know, if you have any seats up. So that is another thing for the council to grapple with, is how to package this. The examples in the backup package these 2 questions as one ballot question, but again, you don't have to do that. You could separate those. Because obviously if it's one question, then those issues live or die together. If they're separate, there's a possibility that one of them could get through, the other one not, or both could, or both couldn't. But if you split them, there's a possibility that one could without the other. So how it's packaged is also something you guys need to think about.
Okay. And then still under section 201 was the drawing lots for the runoff. And Keith, I was curious, are there any other, or board, maybe you guys know, are there any other municipalities nearby that do drawing lots instead of a runoff?
So there's actually examples in state law of either drawing lots or flipping a coin in the event of a tie vote. That is not uncommon. No, that is in fact becoming more common because of And the clerk can certainly attest to because of the cost in terms of not personnel resources and dollars of having a runoff election or a special election, that's an expensive exercise. So people are trying to get away from that when they can. And that's a legally recognized way to do it. If there's a tie, draw lots. If there's, I forget what, I haven't looked at that.
Yeah, and for some of our people who listen to this and don't know what that means, can you explain what drawing lots means?
So, you could, there's a couple ways, you could, if you had a tie, you could flip a coin. Heads I win, tails you win. You can literally have, two sticks in your hand and pull the short one loses, the long one wins. You could have two numbers in a hat and pull, the even number wins, the odd number. It's a random act of selecting between the two candidates when there truly is an actual tie and they got the same number of votes.
I don't love that. I'm not gonna lie. I really don't love it. And I understand if we're looking at it from a cost point of view, we don't want to spend more money on a runoff, and we don't want to exhaust our voters, but at the end of the day, I really struggle with, is that fair to the voters? Hopefully we never get to a tie, but we almost got to a tie one year, and it was really close. So, I think if I learned anything the past few years, that we have started to experience those random things that come up, and we do need to be kind of prepared for them. But our small village has 5 people, and we're so small, and I think it's so important for our village to be able to choose who they are selecting. If they have to get out 2 weeks later, or whatever the week span is.
Well, when's the last time we've had more than one person run for a seat?
And there's that. So really, how often will we even be?
No, but my
in that
point is,
situation?
it's normally someone challenging the incumbent, and that's it, right? So the voters did have their chance to select a winner. And if it ends up being a tie, you're going to make them choose between the same 2 people again 2 weeks
Okay.
later, as opposed to eliminating people and then these are the best 2. I'm fine with drawing lots. This
Okay.
isn't something that we would be implementing for the first time in the entire state. It's done in a lot of places. It's going to save money.
Okay, so.
I'm for it.
To the question to the clerk, because you're the one that usually helps with the elections, it has to be an exact tie. So even if a person wins by 1 vote, they win.
Correct.
Okay.
And this eliminates the runoff scenario, because if you actually had an incumbent and 2 challengers, the tie, the way this is written, and even, your charter right now even just requires the highest number of votes cast is the person that wins. They don't necessarily have to have a majority. So if you had 3 people, the only time the tie vote scenario would come into play is if the top 2 were tied. The 3rd person would drop off, and then
Right.
you'd draw lots. So you wouldn't need a runoff election. And if the bottom 2 tied, it wouldn't matter. They'd both drop off because the top vote getter would win the election. So it eliminates any subsequent runoff, whether there's just 2 or more than 2.
Okay, so those 2 top people, if they were to tie, again, it has to be exactly the same number. One person has 1 more vote, that person wins, right? Okay.
And if I could elaborate a little, for a minute. A runoff election is never budgeted in our budget, and our municipal election is split between all the different municipalities that have an election. So if we have a runoff election, and there's only 2 municipalities that have to have that election, then we are going to bear the full cost of that election, the other municipality. So that cost could be, where we're paying almost $30,000 for an election right now, but we're splitting with other municipalities. A runoff election could be double that.
How many, statistically, how common is it for there to be a tie. Has there been a tie in village history?
Not since I've been here, but as you know, there was very close.
Yes. Very aware.
Very close, so.
The only other thing I can add to that, you know, I've currently work in 7 cities. I've worked in a number of others over the past 20 years. Never seen a tie anywhere. Again, we've come close. We've had to have recounts where it was 1 or 2 vote difference, but I also have never experienced a tie in 20 years working in more than 10 municipalities.
Mount Nora was modified in the past.
Did they? Which isn't to say it can't happen.
I don't know, but just the chances of it being exactly the
Statistically,
same.
that would mean that you're dead.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, Lori, I agree, and I've had the same thoughts that I think
I get where I'm going.
the voters should be able to choose, even if it's a tie. But also, this is going to them to vote on, so
I'm fine with it,
I
as long as
think
it has to be
that-
the same exact number, not a percentage, or they have to be within 5 votes of each other. As long as it's the exact same amount, I'm fine with it being a lot.
yeah, because even the residents and voters are potential future candidates. So if that's what everyone wants, then that's what, you know, everyone's signing up for in the future. So I say, go with it and see what the voters want.
Okay.
So on the ballot, are we deciding to separate the length of the terms as one question, and then the other question will be term limits? There'll be 2 separate questions on the ballot?
My opinion, I would propose leave the terms and term limits as one, and then on the sample, we had, the vacancy and runoff were as one, and someone did note to keep, you know, potentially have them as 2. So I think the runoff should be its own separate question. Or drawing lots, sorry, should be its own separate question. That's my opinion.
I agree with that. Okay.
Aaron, what do you think?
As it reads in the sample, it's kind of long, about combining the term period and, or the years in a term and the term limit. I think I'd like to see them split up, only to help people understand it better. It's kind of a lot to read, but I'm fine with this. I'm just trying to think of, you know, like Keith said, voter fatigue.
Yeah.
Yeah, and-
People 7 words into this are gonna be like, all right, you know.
And just for the council's information, state law limits that summary to 75 words and the question to 15 words. So that's the most each question can be, is 75 words, and the summary can be 75 words, the question can be no more than 15 words. And the examples that you've been provided do comply with those requirements, so that,
They do.
believe it or not, I counted.
This is a, shall the Village of Tequesta Charter be amended to increase council member terms? That whole thing is one long sentence. That's just a big question.
Let me get down to it.
I mean, it's just a sample, so it's not a
Yeah.
big deal, but that looks like one big question to me.
Yeah, that is what would be on the ballot. As an example, that is what a ballot question could look like. It would
Oh,
have.
I thought you said the question could only be 15
The
words.
I guess I said it backwards. The summary is 15
Okay.
words, or the title is 15 words.
I got it.
And then the question can be no more than 75.
Okay.
So,
But Keith, you did make a good point that if a voter is reading, let's use that ballot example question about increasing the terms from 2 years to 3 years, and also increasing or adding term limits. If that voter doesn't want term limits and they vote no, then that takes out the option of increasing the terms to 3 years.
if you combine the subject matter into one question, You know, in my opinion, arguably it is related, and it could be combined, but yes, then they travel together, and if somebody likes the idea of term limits, but doesn't like the idea of the 3-year term, then they're gonna, then they have to decide if they wanna vote for what they like and live with what they don't, or vice versa. If you separate them out, then you could split your vote, or have vote differently on the different topics.
I like them split up. I think it's easier, more kind of concise and to the point. One question and then another question, not 2 questions within one question,
Yeah, so they will choose whether or not we go from 2 years to 3 years.
Right.
That could be its own option. And then they either like term limits or they don't. I do fully support the 3 years to be able to set goals and reach them and keep our strategic plan on track for whoever's sitting up here and puts that in place. But then if the person, for whatever reason, doesn't like term limits, it just takes all that away.
Yeah.
And I don't know why somebody wouldn't support that, but
Okay, so you want them separate as well?
I don't think it's that big of a deal if we separate it out,
Okay.
in my opinion.
So just draft them separately. And then the drawing lots is a separate line and question as well?
Yes.
Mayor, may I ask the attorney something? Because
Yes.
we did discuss putting them together because they kind of work, they travel with each other. The question is this: if there are not a change to the limit, the term limits, and they become 2, but yet on the ballot, the next one is, do you want 2 or 3 terms? And the term now is going to be 2 instead of 3. How is that going to work?
Well,
Yes, then you're only for 4 years.
if term limits passed, but a 3-year term did not pass, then you would have 2-year terms and a term limit. So if it was a 3-year term limit, you would have a maximum amount of service of 6 years. That could happen. Alternatively, if it went the other way, then you would have unlimited 3-year terms if the 3-year term passed but term limits failed. So.
And I think it's the part about that if it doesn't go from 2 to 3, and yet the term limits go in, and you've
Right.
already said it's going to be a term, 2 or 3 terms. But instead of being 3-year terms now, they could be going back to 2-year terms. I just wanted to bring that up as a point of clarification, because we did discuss this.
Yeah, and that was one of the reasons I was thinking package them too, was just for the fact that I would think it was appropriate to vote on the whole package, and then if not, it just stays how it is now, and we just,
If I might interject, this became a hot issue. I think it would be easier to sell a 3-year limit or 3-year term if you have limits. Because then people know it's not gonna be like Joe
Forever.
Picard who was on 16 years.
Okay.
Otherwise, you might exactly get that. You might get the backlash of people who go, well, I don't want him on there, and then keep the 2 years. And that's
Okay.
kind of why we coupled them.
Okay.
That changed my mind. I'm good
yeah,
with them.
makes sense. Just
Yep.
leave it how it is or do the whole package.
Why didn't you speak up
That
sooner,
makes sense.
Mrs. Nielsen? Okay, I understand where you guys are going with it then. I'll keep it together,
Okay.
and we'll just see what
And then
they
drawing
either
lots
want.
still separate.
Yes.
Okay, I'm gonna move on to section 2.02. This is about a registered voter, I think this one, let's see, continuous 1 year as a resident. So I'm good with that, I have no comments.
I support 1 year.
So do I.
Okay, the next section, 2.05, vacancies and forfeiture of office. We talked about that, you brought it up already a little bit. Lori, so I'll let you take the floor to kind of finish your thoughts there.
Okay, my mindset is going, it really comes down to the time frame that any council members would be left with. So I'll use an example. If by chance there's a council member that passes away, if it is 6 months or less, I would recommend that the sitting council would leave that seat empty or choose to do a special election. But because it's only 6 months and it's so close to the next election, I would say just let it sit empty, because you would still have 4 council members at the helm. I don't think council members should be appointing anybody to council on behalf of the residents, because that's the one thing that the residents have to choose. Because all staffing goes through the manager or directors, and committees like planning and zoning, environmental advisory committee are all appointed by council. So for me, the 5 council members out of over 6,000 residents, that's the one thing that the residents have. So I would like to stay away from appointing a person to fill a council seat.
But you want to tie that into a 6-month thing? Like that's your number? You're okay if it's 7 months, then we appoint somebody?
Was that how it's currently?
Well, I want to stay
written?
away from appointed at all, but
Okay.
I understand, you know, if there happens to be an election and a
Oh, I
person
see.
comes
Go
into
to
a
election.
seat and heaven forbid, a month into their term, they pass away, or they have to be removed for whatever reason, legal reasons, then that council is left with over a year and a half or even a year without a partner on the team. So I'm just saying, if you're looking at time length, you know, a year, I would support a special election to fill that seat. I know it costs money, but
Can we have a sitting council with an even number of council members?
You
I
can.
was
The
informed we
danger is a 2-2 vote
Right.
on any item means no action is taken, and it just sort of, it doesn't pass, it doesn't not pass.
Right.
It just sits there in limbo until somebody changes their mind, or you have a fully seated council and you take the matter up again. So, and I have seen that happen where there's been a vacancy, and council has gotten stuck in that, and they weren't able to do anything on, I don't remember what the issue was, but I've seen it happen, and it can be very frustrating. So
I'd like to stay
that
away
that
from
is the
that.
danger of having an even-numbered council is a tie vote.
I'm staring at this microphone the whole time I'm trying to watch you, so I'm going to put this down if that's all right.
So Lori, I just want to understand, are you suggesting to keep the language the way it was currently written?
no, I don't want to see any appointment be done.
At all?
I don't think it's appropriate.
Can we get into the appointment? What is the process of appointing someone
That's right.
See,
hypothetically?
and that's where I get into is,
They're asking what
does
the
everyone put up a
process
name?
of
Who chooses
Yeah,
who?
how
Are we
would that
gonna
work?
have buddies on here? Are we gonna,
What is the appointment process? Was
Yeah.
that the question? Well, that process belongs to the council. A typical way that I've seen vacancies get filled is an announcement is made, and, you know, notice is posted on the typical, you know, on the website, on whatever message boards you have, and in the newsletter, however you want to get the word out, and then you give people an opportunity to submit a resume or a letter of interest, and then you may have interviews, and then at the end of the day, there's a vote, and the council votes to appoint whoever the successful candidate is into that seat to fill that unexpired term.
I would be really careful with that, because then again, I think it was mentioned earlier, if there was an appointment, that person that sits in that seat kind of gets to test the waters and showcase what they can or can't do well, and then the election comes up and residents want to run, that person already has a leg up, but it wasn't chosen by the residents, it was chosen by council. So it's not a level playing field, in my opinion, for the residents. Again, I go back to, it's the one thing that the residents get to choose.
You mean because now they're an incumbent?
Kind of, because they've already got a chance.
Hey, like you said, step up, take them down.
I know, I just think the people should be choosing who sits in these seats and not necessarily council, because council gets to choose who sits on P and Z, EAC. The manager gets to choose staffing, directors get to choose everyone else underneath them. What do the people get to choose then?
I
I don't want to
understand.
take that away from the people at all.
I'm okay with this because it's a very special circumstance. You know, it's something that we probably won't be doing very often as a council. I'm fine with it. I actually kind of like it.
when we're talking less than a year, generally, it would be less than a year, correct? And then after that year, it's the next general election. It's not for that specific seat, it's just the next general election, and then that person, their seat would be vacant, right?
What do you, I'm not.
So if someone's appointed
Yes.
temporarily, it's until the next general election, no
Right.
matter what their seat number.
Not when that seat is up.
Yeah, no matter the seat number, it's the
Yeah,
next
but
general
I
election.
believe the way we wrote this is they would be appointed until the next election,
Right.
and then they would have to qualify regardless of where they were in the actual term.
Right, so like any other candidate, they would have to go through that
They'd have
process
to
at that
qualify
time.
and be on the ballot. And, if they were unopposed, then there you go, then,
Yeah.
then that's fine, there's nothing wrong with that, but it would require the going through the exercise of qualifying. One other thing to keep in mind, and the clerk reminded me, in terms of dealing with a special election scenario, it's not just the village saying, well, we need to have a special election, so we're gonna have it. If we're gonna use the supervisor of elections, they have to consent to the special election. That's actually a statutory provision, which isn't to say that, under the current SOE administration, they wouldn't, but that, depending on what's going on in their office, that we might not be able to get the date that we want. Someday in the future, you may have a less cooperative supervisor of elections, that may make that more challenging. That is another layer of, it's not just when we want to have it, it's when that office is willing and able to accommodate. So that could be, that's just another scheduling issue to keep in mind.
I'm actually fine with that, because it could be a couple months until a special election could be held. And I just want to make clear, it doesn't necessarily have to be a death, but there has been, kind of close to home, there's been council members on some councils that have been a little in the gray area with Sunshine Law. And if it ever came to a point where someone has to be removed, it could be a year and a half of that seat being empty. And I would much rather have the people choose who goes in that seat than appointing someone. Because I don't know how council really chooses that one person for the people. That's, again, I go back to,
No,
it's
but
the one thing.
It would never be a year and a half, because it would never be more than a year, because it would always be the next general election. So you would never have anybody who was appointed sitting for more than a year. And in fact, I think if you're appointed and you want to run in the next one, I know this is kind of a nitpicking thing, but I don't think you should be allowed to put on your sign, re-elect, since you weren't elected to begin
Absolutely.
with, so you kind of take that
Yeah.
away from them. So like you said, it's not as much of an advantage as an incumbent, because, you really never won an election. So that might be something to consider as
I
well.
definitely agree with that.
But I'm for especially since it would never be more than a year. I'm fine with that.
And I would have to look at that. There are very specific campaign finance statutory provisions that say when you can and can't use that language that you're suggesting.
Okay.
Off the top of my head, I don't know if an appointment allows them to by state law or not, but we'll look at that and let you
All right.
know.
Well, I'm still gonna hold strong with, I don't think council should be appointing any council members. I still really think the people, no matter if it's a year, 6 months, it should be chosen by the people.
I think, is this, just from the board, was this mostly for financial reasons?
No, if I may put on my historian hat. This only happened once before, back in, I can't remember, the 1900s, obviously. We had a council person who ran, who was ill. He knew he was terminal. He ran and he resigned immediately. There was a huge, it's the first time I ever saw a law enforcement officer in this chamber. That's how angry people were about that. See, it was because of the way it happened. He didn't just die. There was something going on there. So they did that. They went out to the community and they had people, who were applying and all that. They wound up putting the person in who lost the election, Carl Hansen. But he only lost by a little bit. And that seemed to, we weren't happy with it, but that seemed to placate it because he lost for very, very few votes. So that's when the last, not the last committee, but the committee before that, put in that 6-month thing. Because it never was there. They could go on for a full term. So they, when they did charter review, they at least shored up that piece of it. I would also say that it's not just a municipal election, we rolled in a national election, which gives you, you know, another opportunity to go after that seat on a national, if there's a national presidential or midterm or whatever the next election is. It's not just limited to the municipal.
So basically, no matter what, the time frame will never be that large.
No.
Even if the
No.
seat's
It'll
that
never
empty.
be more than a year, and it could be
So
even
even if
less
the
than
seat's
that.
that empty, I mean, is even that big a deal when you're just gonna try and hit whatever next general election is?
Yeah, that's why they put the 6 months in there.
Okay.
to
I mean, I
avoid
still
that
hold strong with that.
controversy.
Okay. Thanks for the history.
You're welcome.
Yeah, I'm okay with leaving it up to the voters on this one as well.
What do you mean?
The voters vote on this, if it's gonna happen or not.
Oh, you're okay?
Yeah, leaving
You're-
it up to the voters.
I got you.
So you're saying a special election? is what you're
No, the way you guys have written it,
The way it's
rewritten it, yeah.
Okay, I wasn't sure.
Yeah.
So it's really up to the council now.
For that short time.
Yeah.
But the voters have to.
Just, yeah, just to
Yeah.
Yeah,
clarify,
that's
you're
right,
for
we're-
appointing,
Thank you.
you're for, you like the idea of council appointing someone to fill that seat, is what you're saying?
I don't think it's a bad recommendation, and I think it's up to the voters to decide.
So she's saying let the voters vote on this wording right here. When I'm suggesting we take that out.
Okay.
I would just not even
That
ask.
just confused me the way, because they're
Have
going
council
to,
appoint,
they're
right?
going to be voting on this no matter what, but we have to decide what we
They're
would
gonna be
like to
voting
see
on
on the
it.
ballot. So
Mhm.
is this what, as it's written,
As
you would like to
written.
see that? Yeah.
Yes,
okay.
as recommended by the board, let the voters decide. And
Yeah.
again, on the last page of our agenda, just that, I think this is the one that was lumped in with the drawing lots, I think.
Correct.
So yeah,
Mhm.
just keep that separate.
Yeah, I like that.
So what I can do, all three of you agreed on segregating the tie vote question into a separate question, which by virtue of doing that would make this a separate question, but we certainly don't have consensus and not even there's two of you are in favor of letting this go to the voters, one of you is not. So the other question will be there, but I don't know where that's going to go based on the other two council members not being here. But, so you'll have, this will, again, by virtue of me carving out the tie vote, this will be left as a separate question.
Okay, moving on to section 3.06, fire rescue and police departments referendum required to dissolve, abolish, or outsource. Any comments on this one?
Yeah, I'm kind of torn on this one. It's kind of like asking neighboring communities to vote on being annexed or not. In my experience here, it's normally a resounding no. And I feel like that might be maybe not in their best interest. So this kind of thing also, I just feel like it would be easy as a resident who maybe is not 100% informed to be like, no, I love our police, without actually knowing why it could possibly be a good thing to be absorbed. So I like that. So in that regard, I like us, the council, really being able to move forward with that. But I think at the end of the day, that's up to the residents, when it comes to their public safety.
And just for information, and I'll certainly let the committee members speak to this, if I'm not mistaken, the motivation behind this, and there are a couple other municipalities that have their own fire departments that are doing this. There was a push, which died a quick death last year, but there was a push by the county to create a fire control district, which would be one step towards really hurting all the municipalities that have their own fire departments, because if there's, it's how it's funded, it's the ability of that district to provide better benefits and salaries to the firefighters who are in the fire control district, and if you know, they were able to consume municipal fire departments into that fire control district, there's tax issues, there's level of service issues. So I think that this is one way to kind of put a roadblock up. Am I right? And was that part of the?
The voters and of the communities.
Decide
will
if,
say,
right.
No, I don't want county, I don't want the district. And I'll just mention this, when we did get the fire rescue service, it was by referendum. The people in the community said, we want our own fire rescue. So a part of this, when we were speaking, was then that made sense that if anybody wanted to come in, say the sheriff, for instance, let's just say Mr. Bradshaw gets excited about Tequesta, which he has been in the past. It should be the voters that say, yeah, we'll be okay with the sheriff instead of Tequesta's police department.
Yeah.
So that's really what it was about, letting them be aware of what was happening and then put it on the ballot. That's what we voted.
Yeah, I like how this is written.
Definitely up to the people.
Yep, I
Go
agree.
back to the people.
Okay, and I think that was the last one. The only other item I'd like to bring up, I think a resident had emailed about adding to the charter about voters voting on sale of village-owned land. Is that anything you guys
We
discussed?
discussed it, but it was decided, and actually I was for it, but because of the time limit, you would have to have a referendum, and so, say there's a piece of property that's, I don't know, stripped somewhere nobody really wants, you would have to put it up for a referendum and go through all that, and then by that time, the buyer probably would go away. It was a timing thing, so.
That makes sense.
So to be just to sell property or to sell and buy?
I think it was sell and buy, is what we looked at.
So they have to go hand in hand? I'm looking at Keith.
In my mind, those would be two separate.
Because I understand what Mrs. Nielsen's saying, you know, when you're trying to, especially, let's say we were trying to buy a piece of land to increase green space, we might have to be quick on the gun on getting it. But if we have to do a referendum, that might hold us up. But selling is kind of the same thing.
Well, I mean, when you're buying, you're acquiring land for public purposes. When you're selling, though, you have an asset, and you're contemplating getting rid of it. So if
Wasn't
it's-
that, can they be separate? Or do they have to be together? Could we be specific about just selling land?
I'm not sure I would recommend the buying piece being a referendum-based process in the charter.
Yeah, I'm not
I'm aware of
recommending
other places that say if you want to sell or enter into a long-term lease even, that has to go to referendum. That's not unheard of. I'm not aware of anyone that says you have to go to referendum to buy something.
Okay.
So
they can't be
yeah,
separate.
I would at least segregate those, and I'm not even sure I would recommend putting a referendum as a condition to purchasing.
I'm not either. I just wanted to clarify if we
Yep.
could do them separate. So we
Absolutely.
could just have it
Yes.
solely for selling
Yes.
lands.
Yes.
Okay.
I think this would came up because the former mayor made an announcement that he was interested in selling Remembrance. And we stopped it, a small much of a stop it. But it would be nice to know that he couldn't do that. But the mayor didn't agree. Wasn't the first time.
The mayor is one of five. Don't forget.
What?
The mayor is one of 5.
I know.
So
We're
it wasn't
not having
stopping
the same
the mayor.
argument again.
Yeah, it wasn't stopping the mayor. We felt that in circumstances with real estate, often you have to move quickly to be able to get it either sold or purchased. And that a 5-member council acting on behalf of the community would have their fingers on the pulse of the community and therefore be able to make a timely decision. Because as you can see, it takes a long time to get something to the ballot and then have to be voted on. So that was the reason that there is not one person that makes a decision on selling or purchasing property. There's 5.
I'm thinking for a second, because I really don't dislike the idea of asking the people when we start talking about selling off the assets that they essentially buy, because it's taxpayers' money. And it's for them, and they get to use it, and anything the village owns is open to anyone that lives in the village. I don't see right now what anything we own, and we don't own that much already, so I don't see any kind of rush we would have to sell anything right now. And this could always be changed on the next charter review. If we were to add this, let's say, and then let's say in the future we own a ton of stuff, and then it could be changed again. I actually think I would support asking the people to sell assets right now, only because we don't have that much. And I think any council member sitting up here, it might not be us next term, whatever, just to really kind of guard that for the people. Because they're paying for it. I didn't buy it.
I agree.
Okay.
And either way, whether there's a referendum attached as a condition precedent to selling or not, another thing that has to happen is that the council has to make a finding that that property is no longer needed for a public purpose. If the property is needed for a public purpose, then it would be inappropriate to sell it. But if it's quote-unquote surplus, and the village doesn't use it, doesn't need it, doesn't serve a public purpose, that finding needs to be made prior to selling as well. And that is a decision that the council has to make.
And Jeremy, are we even in a position to sell any of our land and be in compliance with our comp plan?
So I would say, yes, I mean, like I think we have, let me just throw out a number, we have like excess of 3 acres of parkland. So in theory, and if you wanted to sell, I'd hate to throw out any name of any property because everybody will quote me and kill me, but if we wanted to sell an acre of parkland that we had, we could do that and still be, but if you were talking about, a larger park like Tequesta Park and you wanted to stop that lease, then, then we wouldn't be in compliance. If you want to stop the lease on the railroad, we would not be in compliance of our comp plan. So there are some properties that we could sell and still be in compliance. It just depends on which ones those are. So,
behind Cypress.
huh?
Like that stuff behind Cypress.
Yeah, so the one behind Cypress, I mean, if you sold that, you'd still be in compliance with your comp plan. It does not calculate it doesn't even calculate in your comp plan for parks and open space. So the answer is yes, but it's a complicated yes.
But that's kind of a slippery slope too, because if a lease doesn't get renewed for one of the areas we are currently counting our comp plan, then maybe we wouldn't be in compliance.
Right, so there's a lot of factors that would teeter into it.
We're pretty tight, I think, to begin with. And I'm not, for the record, I'm not suggesting selling anything right now,
yeah.
but I kind of want to talk it through, so it's, we're not in a really position to be able to be selling off a bunch of land too, just because we're so close with our comp plan.
Right, and I
requirements as
do
it
agree with
is.
that, and that's why I'm saying, that's what I'm saying, we are tight, but I think for us to maybe safeguard that for the future, for anyone who is sitting up here, they will have to ask the residents if they want to sell anything, because we are so tight. Imagine if they were just selling things off, and it almost kind of brought up last year or the year before, and it was very frightening. And the people were just hearing about it, some of them hearing late, and then they're coming to our meetings, and that's not fair to them, because they did want something out of that property.
For sure.
I mean, it's theirs. I really go back to, again, it's theirs. Maybe if we were more comfortable and had more we could sell, but we don't, I think we should be very careful guarding it for the people.
So Keith, how do we handle a topic that the board did not present, but maybe there's other council members not here that might want to discuss this? Aaron, do you do you think it's worth additional discussion?
I do. I mean, everything's always worth additional discussion, but I mean, as it reads from the resident, I don't see, I don't see the need for it, but more discussion I'm fine with.
Yeah, I think whether you bring this back to another workshop, because you're at some point gonna have to have the 5 of you vote on these. I will draft we'll have 6 questions based on the discussion from tonight, including the housekeeping question. If you want me to draft a example question of selling property, I can do that, but certainly, in my opinion, should that should certainly have full council discussion. That was not contemplated by this committee. It wasn't, tonight's really the first time it's been discussed in conjunction with this charter review, so this is a brand new topic.
I definitely think it needs some more
And as I
workshopping.
said, we don't have to have an ordinance done until well into the fall. So if you wanted to workshop this again with the example questions based on tonight's discussion, plus again, I can write up an example of what that might look like, and then with all 5 of you present to discuss all of that, and there'd still be more than enough time to get an ordinance drafted through the reading process and still have plenty of time to get the word out before the March 2023 election. So you've got all kinds of time.
Okay.
So what was the original intention of this workshop? Was the intention to do this workshop and then it would go to the next council meeting and not have to workshop it again? What was the original intention?
I'm not sure that was
Or was
discussed
there-
at that depth. I don't recall a discussion about only having 3 of you present at this workshop.
Right.
In my opinion, the fact that you only have 3 council members at the workshop is not a bad reason to have a follow-up workshop with all 5 of you to look at what the questions will look like based on what you discussed tonight, and make sure you have buy-in, at least a majority of the council, because at least one of these, we don't even know if there's a majority of the council that's in favor of it. There's 2 of you were and 1 was not, so that there's a big question mark on that one.
It's possible it came up, I didn't know where it would be placed, I didn't know it would be its own workshop. I had just asked at the public meeting that we chomp through some of the details, especially some of those key items that are so important, because it's pretty much the foundation of what the council is. And then this is where we came up, and here we are. Again, I thought we were all gonna be here though, but yeah.
Okay, so ideally 1 more workshop and then we have the time for that. And then we'll make sure everyone can in fact attend the next workshop, so we don't have to workshop it again. Okay, any other additional comments, questions?
Well, thank you guys for your time. You
Yes,
guys
thank
all
you so
came.
much. You did a great job. Very
Do you wanna
thorough.
ask- I don't know if there's any public comment
Oh,
tonight. or
public
not.
comment?
You want to take that, or? I don't know, Ms. Watkins looks like she's chomping at the bit.
Sorry.
Good evening, Pat Watkins, 167 River Drive. In that you're going to workshop it again, and I'm very supportive of that because I'm disappointed to see the other council members not here to help you with this. But I do we'll do a little more research, but I know during my stint here, we did have a council member who resigned, and I want to say it was around Christmas time, and the election was going to be March, and obviously an appointment was the easy way to go because it was such a short time frame. And in that situation, it really made sense. So it's just one more example, and I want to be sure of my accuracy with that, but it did indeed happen. Thank you.
Can I make one request? Can you let the manager know what the turnout of that appointment was? Did you guys actually appoint someone, and did they rerun at the next election?
We'll research it. How's that? I want to
Okay.
be sure I'm accurate. and-
I just, that way we can all have that
Of course.
information for history basis.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions, comments?
No me.
Okay, motion to adjourn?
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
All in favor,
Second.
second?
Second.
All in favor, three with aye.
Aye.
All right, thank you, everyone.
One more.